I would like to know, do you have one moment in your career that you regret, a missed opportunity, that you would like to share with us?
I think I have a couple. And I think they come out of being 20-something and being put in a situation where suddenly your career is really skyrocketing very quickly, and you're jet setting at 22 years old in New York City. And I think I wish I had stayed at Nickelodeon a little bit longer. I was there for 2.5 years before, you know, an entertainment mogul scooped me up and took me over to his company. But I think had I stayed, I probably, you know, I could have been, you know, senior vice president or president of the channel at this point. I loved that place. And my mentor was my really good friend who was my boss, Herb Scannell, who eventually became the president of the network. And I think had I stayed with him, I would have gone on that journey. The part about it that I don't regret is because I would have missed the other stuff that came, the really juicy, crazy stuff that came with making the departure from Nickelodeon. But I do often think about that. Another regret I have is after doing, it was 3 seasons of New York Undercover, and the show was still on, and I'm with one of the biggest producers in the world, Dick Wolf, and I took another job in Los Angeles. And I think when you're with someone who's that powerful, you kind of like, I probably should have stuck around. I could have probably been, you know, an executive producer on Law and Order by now, or one of the franchise, because he believed in farming out things with his existing group. But I left each situation on a great note, and I say that because the bridges that you build, you don't want to burn them, you don't want to shake them, you don't want to do anything. You want to make sure that, because the same people that you see coming up, you see coming down. And so I developed almost mentoring kind of relationships in each situation, and so I can still to this day, actually 2 days ago, called Arthur Fournay, who is Dick's, like, one of his main executive producers. I hadn't spoken to him in about 5 years, but we picked up, it was just like I'd never left the show, or I'd never left Wolf Films. And so I'm making up for it by making sure that I'm constantly reaching out to those people and keeping those relationships going. But I think in those 2 instances, when you're young and you feel invincible and you feel like, oh, it's time to do something, sometimes you got to stick with it a little bit. So those are the 2 instances. Other than that, I don't have any regrets, even with the mistakes.
Back to your books, did you ever think about writing like something inspirational? Because you're super inspirational.
Here's the thing. I think that you have to be tested in order to have a testimony. And I'm 40 years old, and I've been really, really successful. I probably made more money than my parents thought about making in early years. I mean, even in my 20s. I spent a lot of money. I didn't plan some things that well, but there's something incredible about flying by the seat of your pants. But then I got to a point, like most women, where you're facing 35 and you start worrying about your biological clock and, am I going to get married? Am I going to have a family? And for me, being in the entertainment world and being in that world, guys, I mean, heck, Dick Wolf just has a 3-month-old, and Dick is, you know, getting up there. But I mean, men can kind of do that. They can decide at 50 or 60 to start a family or have a second chance at starting a new family. Women, it's like our cutoff time comes. And I think I was spending so much time talking to girlfriends and listening, because we listen to girlfriends, oh my God, I gotta get a baby, and all of that began to work a number on me. And I kept saying, I don't want to be 40 and not have a life and just have, you know, a car and a career and be able to, because after a while the party gets real tired. And so I jumped into something that was the most devastating experience of my life, and Red Book did a big article on it, and perhaps it inspired the main character in Wildflower's story. But, you know, never mess with the power of the pen. But all that to be said is that I think you have to live enough to be able to say something, so that if I tell a message to a woman in her 50s, or a woman in her 60s, I can connect with them because there are some things that I've experienced in my years that the experience outweighs the years in many instances. And so that happened. It was very devastating. It almost really broke me to the point where I literally, it was like feeling like I had to leave LA in a ball of flames. Career and things were going, but I hid it from everybody. And there's so many women that can relate to masking things. And I came home and I regrouped, and I didn't even have time to have a nervous breakdown because I had a book that I had to go out on tour with. So again, that plays into women. It's like we have to do too much because something's always on our plate. And then that happened, and I found out my dad has prostate cancer. And so then it's like, you know what? I got to really give up my life in LA, sell my house, start fresh, focus on family, but I still got to write these books. So I say all that to say I didn't really have what I thought was a journey just because I made some accomplishments and did a few little things. Don't compare to when you personally, have to go through something. And now I feel like I have something to say.
What advice can you give to graduating college students, communication majors who are trying to find their first job?
I would say, and it's okay that it's March and you're thinking about this because sometimes it doesn't really come full circle until right about now. And I would suggest really taking the time, any spare moment you get, every sort of waking moment, because those days are approaching, and look at the avenues in places like Kansas City, which is a great market for communications. St. Louis is a great market for communications. I will tell you, and because I know about St. Louis more so, that in St. Louis, there are a lot of really great cosmopolitan things kind of happening. There's a great magazine called Alive magazine that almost, I swear it looks like a big New York publication. It is, I think, one of the most beautifully produced and hip and cool magazines that's out on the market. They are based in St. Louis. I would look at places like Alive. Yeah, and they do. And it's a great place, but they also have great events. So even if you're not quite sure you want to write for a magazine or you got to think about marketing, not so much sales, because I was never like a person who, I didn't want the sort of cloud of I've got to make X amount of dollars in order to make my quota. I couldn't do that because I could never sell candy as a kid. But marketing, they do Fashion Week in St. Louis, and I'm telling you that is the best time to network, to really get in on all you want to do is get your foot in the door at some place at this point. You want to get your foot in the door, whether it's KTVI or one of the television stations, getting in as a production assistant. You're just coming out of school. This is the time to be hungry. This is the time to, be so hungry that maybe you have to starve a little bit for the next year and still kind of mooch a little bit off your parents. But this is the time where you can afford to be broke, if you know what I mean. If you're not thinking about graduate school or something like that, this is the time to get in on the ground floor. You're young. You can survive if you miss a couple of meals.